Okay, well, good evening, and thank you very much indeed for joining. I think we've got close to probably to the number of participants we're going to get this evening. Let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Mallew. I'm the recorder for the Sussex Ornithological Society. This event will last about an hour, and we hope to have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you want to ask a question, just click on the tab at the bottom of your screen and type in your questions. We'll try and answer as many as possible. Any that we can't answer, we hope to answer later and put a note on the Sussex Ornithological Society website, which you can look at. So I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Matt Eade. Matt's one of Sussex's top bird watchers. He's actually quite young, I don't think you'll mind me saying, but despite that, he is indeed, and has for many years been one of our top birders. His patch has for many years been the area of the Cuckmere Valley and Seaford, and he spent, I was going to say hundreds, but I think thousands of hours sea watching off Splash Point. And as well as that, he's extraordinarily widely travelled overseas, quite remarkably for such a young man. And I just thought I should give you some idea of how keen he is as a bird watcher. And so I looked on his blog, and I read this from a trip he made to Argentina in 2016. And you should read this account. He's looking for hooded grebes on a remote high plateau in Argentina. And this is what he says: "I hadn't a clue where I was all day, and if it wasn't for a fence line that I parked my car next to, I could still quite easily be up there. I set off on a long hike, not knowing where I was going, nor where any pools were. I headed west for an hour, northwest for 2 hours, and northeast for another hour, during which time I'd only found 4 pools worthy of holding any birds." Now, I find it quite scary just reading that. And you'll have to, unless he tells you, you'll have to look at his blog to find out whether he saw the hooded grebes. Happily, he made his way down from the high Andes and is therefore able to be with us tonight. He's recently moved to Hampshire, where he works for Nature Trek, but he's still very much attached to Sussex and visits us a lot. So none of us can travel very much at the moment, but we can enjoy the thrills of migration season bird watching through Matt's talk. So I'm going to pass straight over to Matt at this point.
Okay, that's great, Mark. Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen for everyone. Let's just make sure it works. Okay, there we go. Well, a very good evening. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me. So how do I get into bird watching? Well, when I was much younger, my dad used to take me out just at the back of Seaford, where he showed me many of the local birds of the area. Then as the years have slowly gone by, I've very much got into the local birding and then the bird in a wider area as well. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about the autumn bird migration in Sussex. Now you're probably wondering, with spring just around the corner, why I'm not going to feature spring migration. And that is purely because I do find the spring slightly underwhelming. Of course, it's something we all look forward to, especially when March and the cold northeasterly winds are blowing around. However, it tends to be rather short-lived. So it normally starts around late March, but ends towards the end of May. And also, another reason why I'm not talking about spring migration, as Mark has already said, I spend countless hours down at Splash Point staring out at sea. So it would be a very tedious evening for all of you this evening, just talking about the birds passing by at Splash Point. So where you would find me in a normal year, so this is my patch, Seaford Head, overlooking the beautiful Seven Sisters. So during the spring and autumn migration, you'll often find me up there, only from late March to, I guess, around the first week of June. Then I'll start up again in July and finish around November. Now, Cuckmere Haven is another site that I also watch quite regularly. The Seaford Head in the background there, and the start of the Seven Sisters on the left. And here I tend to spend all year, as it's a very productive site, but in the autumn it can be exceptionally good for waders and species like windchecks, etc. And of course there is the famous groin at Splash Point, so this is where I spend a long amount of hours in the spring, waiting for prominent skewers and and other exciting species that fly past. So tonight I'm going to start off with waders, and mainly because these are the first species to migrate south from their breeding grounds in northern England or in northern Europe. So here I've got 4 sites here. So I've got Sussex Peninsula in the southwest, which is a great spot for waders, as we all know. Porker Brooks there in the Arun Valley, that's also an exceptional spot. Cuckmere Haven, that's my patch, and then out in the far east, we've got Rye Harbour and Pet Levels as well. Now, the first species you're likely to encounter in the autumn migration are green and common sandpipers. Now, these tend to arrive as early as the last week of June. So these would be failed breeders or non-breeders, so they can't find a mate on their breeding grounds, or they've just given up completely, and they start migrating south as early as mid-June and arriving on our shores around the end of June. So these are the 4 main areas, I would say, where we would expect to find a large amount of waders during the entire autumn migration. So recent records of a scarce and rare waders in the autumn, apologies for that. We have the recent American golden plover at Rye Harbour a few years ago. And Cuckmere Haven struck lucky 2 years running with 2 Yank waders. We had the Baird Sandpiper, which was the 8th record for the county, and a semi-palmated Sandpiper a year later, which was the 5th record for the county. Blackwing Pratico also at Cuckmere Haven, and that was an extreme rarity seen just by 1 lucky observer. White Rump Sandpiper at Porker Brooks a few years ago. Wilson's Phalarope and the Sea Yellowlegs at Pet Level, and of course the semi-palmated plover at Forley Island almost 8 years ago now, I believe. Amazing how quickly time goes. So the general weather that is needed to see all these waders, and you would think nice calm conditions are the perfect conditions to see these waders. However, it's the complete opposite. So as you see here, this is actually a large flock of green shank and red shank down at Cuckmere Haven. And these birds have been brought down by extremely bad weather. So normally if there's rain overnight or a storm comes by, then I would quite happily head down to Cuckmere Haven, even if it's raining very hard, as normally this drops a large number of wading birds. And this is exactly what happened in July 2019. For just a single morning, I recorded I think it was about 30 green shanks and 26 red shanks, completely unprecedented numbers for this site. And here we are, just another mixed wader flock, again the result of bad weather. So we've got a ring plover on the left there, a large group of dunlin, and then there's a ruff on the top right bird. Now, curly sandpipers, this was a major event last year. Again, down at Cuckmere Haven, I am very biased towards my patch during the stalk. However, I will try and mention other sites in the county throughout the course of tonight. But the curly sandpipers that landed on my patch last year was a true event. It was actually on my mum's birthday, and we were out in the garden having a nice time, and all of a sudden this large band of rain came through, and this was about halfway through the day. So I thought, of course, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, I bet there's some waders down at Cuckmere Haven. So, of course, once the rain had stopped, I quickly packed my bag and went down there, and I was treated to views of this beautiful flock of 9 adult curlew sandpipers. Again, in this day and age, a completely unprecedented sight in the county. If you go back maybe 20 or 30 years, this would be an almost annual sight, but nowadays, absolutely not, especially when they're all nice adults with their red bellies.
Matt, I'm just getting a little request to speak up a bit from some people.
Okay, no worries. Fine, I'll do my best. Okay, so here we have a juvenile curlew sandpiper on the left, and there is a dunlin on the right. So this is just a nice image to portray the true differences between similar looking species. Now, wood sandpipers, this is another species that, again, can be brought down by bad weather. Last year was a very good year for wood sandpipers in the county, and places like Porker Brooks held extremely good numbers, as did Pet Level, and Cuckmere Haven also had a very good time as well. Now, this bird's a juvenile, and juvenile waders do tend to show extremely well. And again, it's the bad weather that brought this down. If we went through a whole season from July to October in very nice weather, calm conditions, the amount of wood sandpipers you would see and other waders would be very low indeed. Nicely little stints. Again, the juvenile bird is showing extremely well. Again, this was brought down by bad weather last year. And here we are, just a few more waders. Have a black-tailed codwits on the left here and a red shank on the right. More black-tailed codwits. Now there's two different races of black-tailed codwits. These are Icelandic, so they would have bred or tried to breed in Iceland before heading south down to our shores, where the majority do in fact spend the winter. Not also show extremely well. Again, this is a juvenile bird. You can see how fresh the flight feathers are there. Now, of course, this is one we all hope to see each year. Now, last year, I'm sure many bird watchers listening this evening managed to see the Doctoral up at, or wherever it was, Norfolk Brighton, can't quite remember now. And again, these birds show extremely well, but you normally have to work really hard to find or see a Doctoral. So last year we were very lucky, they were quite close to the roads, but normally they turn up in quite remote fields on the South Downs. And again, being juveniles, they show extremely well. Now, these birds, unlike the other waders, these actually rely upon nice, clear weather. So on a light northeasterly in late August, early September, you could easily walk up to the Downs and find a nice field such as this one here, and you may just get lucky and find a trip of Doctoral. Now here in Sussex, we surprisingly do extremely well for the American waders. We don't tend to do too well for the Far East Asian waders, but American waders we do, and it's the complete reverse of passerines, where we tend to do better for the East Asian species and not so much the American species. So this is a buff-breasted sandpiper, a North American bird, and these would breed up in the high states in North America and Canada, and winter down in South America. But this one a few years ago, well, probably about 10 years ago now, at Arlington Reservoir, again a juvenile, showed extremely well. Now this was the Baird Sandpiper I mentioned earlier, that was at Cuckmere Haven, found by a good friend of mine. And this was only the 8th record for Sussex, and again a juvenile showing extremely well. And a year later, this was the semi-palmated Sandpiper. And this bird was actually extremely interesting. It was quite amazing, actually. It turned up in the early afternoon, and it only spent about an hour on the patch before flying south high, and it was never seen again. So that just goes to show that even in the autumn, the migration can be over as soon as it started. But a very good bird nonetheless. And it just goes to show that yes, you do have to work extremely hard for these birds, but the harder you work, normally you are rewarded eventually with a scarce find such as this one. Of course, everyone's favourite bird, no doubt, the grey phalarope, an absolutely beautiful bird that tends to turn up in September and October after the storms that we no doubt have on an annual basis. And again, they show extremely well, normally extremely tired from the ordeal. And here we go, grey phalarope trying to catch its prey. Again in the Cuckmere a few years ago. Now, while we're on storm-driven species, I thought I'd quickly show Sabine as well, that again turned up in the autumn. Again on at Cuckmere Haven, juvenile showing extremely well, but unfortunately it died a few days later, but still a very exciting species to see in the county because they're not that common at all. So we're now going to move to the passerines. So we left the waders behind, moved to the passerines, and these are a number of key sites along the coastline that I've labelled here. So again, we have the Selsey Peninsula in the far west, followed by Climping Gap and Sheepcote Valley, just to the east of Brighton. Then we've got Seaford Head and Cuckmere Haven, then Beachy Head slightly to the east, and then Hastings Country Park in the far east. And these is what I consider to be the hotspot for passerine migration in the autumn. Now, East Sussex does have a strong bias towards having greater numbers of birds, and that is due because of the cliffs. So birds are drawn towards these landmarks, whereas in West Sussex, it's all flat from Medbury in the west all the way to Brighton in the east, and the cliffs start on the east side of Brighton and follow the course of coastline to Eastbourne, where there's another bay, Pevensey Bay, and then Hastings again, the cliffs start again. So that's why we have tend to have more birds on the headlands. So these birds are drawn towards these landmarks. So there's no greater pleasure than on a still warm July morning and heading to the patch for the first time in what seems like ages, but it's not, it's only really a month, and already witnessing the return migration of our summer migrants. Now, normally the first ones to arrive are nightingales. They make themselves known by their croaking noise, and again, they're extremely difficult to see as they are on their breeding grounds, but their croaking sounds normally give them away, and with patience you can get through such as this and this. Now, other returning birds that are much earlier than the others, reed warblers, they tend to hang around for quite a while, like the nightingales on the coast, waiting for their feathers to mature. So reed warblers can spend up to 2 weeks on the coastline ready to make their southbound migration to sub-Saharan Africa. There's just another reed warbler. It's quite amazing to see these birds that normally spend their time in reed beds or sedges, in trees and bushes. That's otherwise you wouldn't normally see on their breeding ground. So it's a very unique experience, the autumn migration. And there's a sedge warbler again, that's in, looks like an elder bush. So again, completely abnormal habitat. And probably for the patch worker who works the coastline in the autumn, the highlights are the willow warblers. Of course, they're very common species, especially in northern England and Scotland. But when they come down, the juveniles are absolutely beautiful, beautiful lemon yellow breasts, and sometimes on some mornings when there's been a fawn of migrants, and you can stand at the top, let's say Supertech for example, and stand at the barn and you just witness loads of warblers migrating north. So they're actually heading back inland to for shelter and food, etc. But an absolute wonderful experience watching the willow warblers during the autumn. And there's one there, absolute stunning bird. Grasshopper warblers, of course, these are not as easy as all the other warblers. In fact, they're extremely difficult. They're very skulky and they rarely show like this. Normally, you've got to get your gaiters on and head into the thick bramble thickets and try and flush them out. Or they can just pop up on the side of the path next to you on the rushes they've been in. But it's always a wonderful sight seeing a grasshopper warbler. So juvenile cuckoos, they start to move also in July and early August. Of course, the adults move off as early as June once they've done their business, especially the males. They head off extremely early back to Western Africa. But juvenile cuckoos, again, are very tame and they've got beautiful plumage as well. And again, they're not that common during the autumn migration. So seeing one is a real treat. Now, this chappie, this is probably what most patch workers wish to find each autumn, and it doesn't happen very often. Only on Seaford Head during the autumn, I've seen 3 birds during the course of the time I've spent birding the patch, which was around 2001, is when I started on the patch. And this is a wood warbler. So I'm sure, as we all know, they're a very rare breeder in the county. I don't think they've bred in the county now for 2 or 3 years. So this is only a proper passage migrant and extremely scarce as well. So they are normally found in small copses, small woodlands, etc. Amongst normally a big fall of warblers. So mornings in early August where you get a big fall of willow warblers, you may get lucky and get a wood warbler in with them. A very smart bird. Unfortunately, that one's not in focus, but there we go. Now, as we head towards the end of August, this is where we start to see the start of the crest migration. I've not got any photos of gold crest for some reason, but I thought I'd make do with a fire crest instead. I'm sure you won't mind. And again, these migrate throughout late August and September and October and into November as well. And at times, very large numbers. And again, these will be found in small woodlands. So now you're probably wondering, when are the best conditions to see a big fall of migrants? Now, pastoral migration is extremely difficult to predict. The number of years I've been observing the autumn migration. I still can't quite ascertain the perfect conditions. However, it tends to be that the nice calm conditions, maybe some low cloud in the morning, but as long as it's calm and still, and maybe a light easterly wind, and those seem to be the optimum conditions. Now, of course, it's not all about the coastline either. On these clear and calm conditions, the inland sites tend to get most bird activity. So I remember in August 2019, I believe it was in the third week of August, that's when the optimum time for bird migration is for passerines. It was extremely clear and calm within the county, and therefore birds don't have to be at the coast. They, they can see the sea. They don't need to come down to the coastline. And so the day I spent at Beachy Head, actually, on this day, it was extremely quiet. There wasn't much around. And whilst at Chancery Ring that day, there was 120 spotted flycatchers. So it just goes to show that you don't have to be at the coastline. Just choose some high points along the South Downs where there's plenty of bushes and cover for these migrants, and no doubt you will strike lucky with a good number of migrants. So there's a spotted flycatcher. Again, these tend to arrive late August and throughout September. So the third and fourth week of August and the first week of September tend to be the prime time for autumn migrants, the most numbers at least, especially in the right conditions. Wingchats also another firm favourite for many bird watchers in the county. Of course, they don't breed in the county, so we only see them on passage, and normally in autumn when they hang around in the form of small flocks. Wheatears are, of course, another favourite. Of course, showing off their beautiful white rump as they fly off along the fence lines, etc., and on cliff tops and inland high points. And tree pipits as well, they're also very vocal as they fly over. It's very unusual actually to get one perched like this. The number of years I've been birding Seaford Head, there's only a few occasions where I've actually seen a tree pipit land, and this was last year, and so I'm glad to be able to share this picture with you this evening, because it doesn't happen very often. And yellow wagtails, of course, they're another favourite. So anywhere along the coastline in late August, early September, just try and find some cattle. It doesn't matter where, whether it's at the coast or inland, and there will be some yellow wagtails in amongst them, no doubt. So I'm now going to talk about drift migrants. So these tend to occur late August and throughout September. The term drift is basically birds just being slightly blown off course. So here are a few arrows just indicating where these drift migrants may come from. So there we've got Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and just anywhere in Europe, really. And this is quite an exciting time for the patchworker, especially at a coastal migration point, is that although these birds tend to hit East Yorkshire and Norfolk and North Kent, the birds do slowly migrate down to the south coast. And here in Sussex, we do tend to pick up many birds that are moving south from their drift migration. And pied flycatchers are probably the most favourite of these drift migrants. So last year again was an exceptional year for the county for pied flycatchers. A huge number hit the Yorkshire coastline, up to 200 birds during the day alone at certain points. And so without doubt, a large number of these birds did manage to make it down to the Sussex coast. And we were treated to very large numbers, and most mornings you would go out whether Beachy Head, Seaford Head, or Plimping, Selsey, etc., and you would see a pied flycatcher. And of course, these don't breed in the county either, so it's another wonderful sight. And there we go, just showing in the beautiful early morning sunshine. Redstarts are another drift migrant, again, that come in from the continent. And again, they follow the same routes as the pied flycatchers. So they hit the south coast and they just move down and eventually get to Sussex. And inland sites, the ones I showed you earlier, like Mount Harry near Lewes, Chancery Ring, etc., are extremely good to actually pick up their redstarts on migration. But of course, everyone's favourite, and it's certainly my favourite, and I'm sure it's many of yours as well, and that is the wryneck, an absolute awesome bird that is extremely elusive, and I've still never got that pristine shot. If Dorian Mason is watching tonight, then I'm very jealous of all the photos you have of wrynecks. But it is everyone's favourite bird. And again, last year we were treated with an eruption of wrynecks that hit the coastline here in Sussex. The year before, however, it was awful, and we only had about 4 or 5 birds. So it's a good indicator that the wind direction actually brings these birds. So if it was a southwesterly wind in August and September, and we would not be getting these birds. So if it's a northeasterly, easterly or southeasterly wind, then that is where we would expect to come across these drift migrants. And there we go, wryneck, everyone's favourite bird. Now, of course, amongst all these drift migrants, you do get the scarcities as well, and this is where it does start to get slightly exciting. So this is an Ortolan bunting that was taken at Beachy Head 11 years ago. I can't believe it. But just recently, Ortolan buntings have been a main feature during late August, early September, as many birds have been heard calling at night, but also many have been seen just passing over during the day. But these, it's a beautiful bird and showing that lovely white eye-ring there as well. Redback shrikes, again, another firm favourite for many. Again, these hit the Yorkshire, North Kent coastline, Norfolk coastline, and eventually make it down to the Sussex coastline. Not that common though, most years maybe 1 or 2 birds in the autumn. Again, last year I think there were around 3 or 4, but normally, yeah, normally 1 or 2 birds and always in their juvenile plumage. Now, another firm favourite for many is the hoopoo. This chap was actually found in August, not the standard month one would normally be found, but so this chap at Cookman in August stayed around for a few days. Again, last year was an unprecedented year for hoopoos, but in the spring, I believe in the autumn, there weren't any records at all. So they are still a scarce visitor in the autumn, and the spring is definitely your best shout. But again, a drift migrant, it can just turn up at any time. Now, moving to the warblers, this chap is a melodious warbler, a rather scarce warbler, normally only 1 or 2 records a year in the county. And again, these tend to occur around the big fall days. So late August, when there's a big fall of willow warblers, for example, you may just get lucky with this melodious warbler. And scarcer still, the icterine warbler. Not very many records at all of these in the county, around 30 or 40 overall. And the main difference really is that very long priming projection you can see, but there hasn't been an icterine warbler in the county for some years now. So to see one of these in the county is a real treat. So that's it for drift migration. I'm now going to move over to the raptor migration. Of course, this is another favourite for many. It tends to kick off in the last week of August and the first 2 weeks of September, especially for the honey buzzards. Now, the optimum conditions involves light southerly winds and clear skies, and start scanning from around late morning. That's the best. And of course, in the year 2000 was an unprecedented year because there was a huge high pressure over Northern Europe, and this blew all these honey buzzards over to the UK, and Sussex alone in 2 weeks saw over 500 individuals migrating south, mainly from Beachy Head. So an absolute superb sight. But honey buzzards are absolutely wonderful to see. But last year, there were very few again, despite now breeding very well in the county. It's still quite tricky to see on migration, as they tend to head further south and east towards Dungeness area. Of course, ospreys are very frequent in the county in the autumn. Places like Pagham Harbour and Chichester Harbour are obviously the firm favourites to see this species. But of course, they can be seen on migration anywhere really along the south coast, mainly again at headlands, where they tend to aim for before crossing the channel. So Beachy Head again is another firm favourite place to see them. Now, shorted owls, again, these can have good years, they can have bad years. It depends on the rodent situation in continental Europe. But again, there's always 1 or 2 lingering around in the autumn months around coastal areas. And of course, who can forget the padded harriers? There's now been an incredible 4 padded harriers in the last 10 years, I believe. Yeah, the first one was 2011. So the last 10 years, there's now been 4 padded harriers in Sussex, all juveniles. And soon they're going to be overtaking Montagu's harriers because they've become extremely rare. But normally in October time, you may just get lucky, not necessarily at the coast, inland sites as well, to see a padded harrier. I'm sorry, I don't have a better photo. There we go. Okay, as we now move into October, this is again something more exciting. You know, the chance of a rare, scarce bird turning up. But it's also the prime time to see ring ouzels. Now these can have again good or bad years, but on some years they can flock in extremely large numbers at coastal sites. There's this one time at Beachy Head. It was in the very late afternoon, early evening, and I was there. Actually, I think I was twitching a red-flanked bluetail, which I dipped, but we'll get onto them a little bit later. And I came across a very large flock of ring ouzels just feeding on ground berries. And as the sun slowly set, a flock of 80 rose up in front of me, circled to a great height, and just flew south out to sea and never to be seen again. So a spectacular sight. But again, that's any coastal area, or of course Tisbury Ring in West Sussex is a really good spot to catch up with them in October. Now, of course, this is a spring male that I captured a few years ago, but it is my best photo of a ring ouzel, so I thought it'd be worth sharing. Beautiful birds. Lapland buntings can turn up in October. Again, some years and some years not. It depends on the situation further north, but again, another fine species to see. Now, of course, as we move into the depths of October, this is where we start to come across, or hope to come across, the rare birds that we all obviously hope for to make landfall in Sussex. So here are a few arrows of where these birds may or may not come from. So we'll start with the top one, then we'll slowly move down. So around Norway, Sweden, or Scandinavia area, this is where we would hope to come across, or hope a red-flanked bluetail or greenish warbler would come from to hit the county. Of course, red-flanked bluetails, they're probably the most sought-after species for many county listers, including myself. But there have now been 3 bluetails in the county, and not one yet has been twitchable. So we're very much hoping that that one day that is soon cleared up. And greenish warbler is another example of birds that can come from Scandinavia. Now, from the Far East, around Siberia way, of course, we've got the yellow-browed warblers and Pallis's warblers and Hume's leaf warblers, as well as many other species. From Western Asia, we've got the booted warblers, Dorian shrike and Isabeline wheaties. This is where they would come from. And as we head slowly closer towards the UK, around Poland way, or Eastern Europe at least, the likes of aquatic warbler, barred warblers, and common rose finches may move in. And from Southern Europe, the likes of melodious or subalpine warblers may also turn up. So this is where these rarer species would have originated from. So some species that back in the day in Sussex were actually annual and in respectable numbers for their rarity status. And this is an aquatic warbler, a bird that used to be frequently trapped and ringed at pet levels, but sadly isn't anymore. And this was the last record of aquatic warbler in the county a few years ago, just after the Pagham Harbour bird, maybe 2015, can't quite remember. But of course, this bird has had a dramatic decline on continental Europe, and that is why we're seeing a reduction of aquatic warblers here, not just in Sussex, but in the UK alone. So of course, it's not just down to the wind directions or anything, it's actually down to the populations of these species wherever they come from. Tawny pipit is another species that was frequently recorded annually in Sussex, but again, it's now a BBRC rarity. And last year there weren't any tawny pipits in Sussex, and there was only one the year before that. So this chappie, this was photographed at New Haven Tide Mills now many years ago. But again, this is a rare sight in the county nowadays, whereas back in the 80s or 90s, they used to be frequently encountered. The delightful red-breasted flycatcher, I'm sure many of you remember this male that was at Beachy Head back in 2014. An absolute striking bird, and there's small numbers still pass through the county each autumn, maybe one or two. Some years we don't get them, but again, a beautiful, delightful bird that again we hope to come across in October. Now, Siberian chiffchaffs, of course, these are most often recorded in the winter months, actually, places like Cold Wharf Sewage Works, or there's currently one at Burpham Sewage Works. But to see one on the coastline is actually quite an event, mainly because they're just not that rare, you know, extremely rare. So along the coastline in the autumn. So your best bet is to visit these sewage works in the winter, but again, to see one in the autumn is excellent. So the yellow-browed warbler, of course, this chap would have come from Far Eastern Siberia, etc. But the range is expanding westwards, which is why we're starting to see many more yellow-browed warblers now. And of course, it's everyone's favourite call to hear one in a sycamore plantation in the heart of October, and that's just the bird you wish to see. Absolutely beautiful bird. Now, slightly rarer is the Pallis's warbler. Last year there were 3 in Sussex, actually, and this one was taken at Rodine. But again, another delightful Siberian gem that we just always hope to come across in the coastal plantations. Absolutely beautiful bird. Now, a warbler that tends to actually turn up more so in November rather than October, and this is the Hume's warbler. Again, much rarer than the Pallis's and far rarer than the yellow-browed warbler. I believe in the county there's been about 5 or 6 records now, so we're doing actually extremely well compared to other counties around us. But yes, another exciting find. Now, you may have to squint for this one. Again, this is another rare bird that once was quite frequent in the county, and this is in fact a barred warbler that was photographed at Seaford Head back in 2009. But this species has again declined in the autumn, has declined in Sussex in the autumn, especially recently. There hasn't been one for many years now. It's quite surprising because they're extremely chunky birds. They're one of the largest warblers in Europe, but unfortunately they're just not that common anymore. Now, of course, desert wheaters is another bird that can turn up every now and then, and Sussex does have a very good success rate with desert wheaters. This chappie was, again, I think maybe 2014 or 2012, I can't remember. If Nick Bond is watching here, he'll tell you in the comments. But again, another striking bird, and these come from Central Asia, so a very long way they come from to reach our shores. Booted warblers, again from Central Asia, a striking bird, and again a very rare bird in the county. There's only been 5 or 6 records, and back in the year of 2013 there were in fact 2 in the county. This one here at Seaford Head, and one a few weeks prior at Climping Gap. So another exciting rare bird there. And there's a blind wheatear. There's only been 1 record of this in the county, over at near Beachy Head, back in 2011. The Dorian shrike at Beachy Head a few years ago as well. Another extremely rare bird, and considering there's now been a few records around Yorkshire, Norfolk, etc. But just down here in Sussex, we tend to miss out on the major rarities. We tend to do well for the scarcities, but the major rarities we don't. However, of course, last year, I'm sure many of you remember, I hope you do, so I was very lucky to come across this bird, and that's of course the lammergeier. That spent 2 days in the county before heading back down to the Alps. So yeah, just an absolute highlight of last year, and just goes to show you, just not sure what is going to turn up in October. So it's an extremely exciting month for rare bird hunting. Now, of course, this is a bit of a sour point. I mentioned earlier red-flanked bluetails. There's only been 4 records in the county. This is basically an image to portray what a red-flanked bluetail looks like. And if anyone does happen to come across a red-flanked bluetail, please let me know straight away. That's all for that one. Now, I did say earlier we don't do too well for American passerines, and this is part of the reason why, compared to the East Asian passerines. And that's because we are a very long way from America, with a lot of landmass of the UK in between us and it. But this chappie a few years ago, 2 years ago, the yellow-billed cuckoo, that was unfortunately found deceased in my hometown of Seaford. Just goes to show you, just not sure what may turn up. So a month that had continuous southwesterly winds, it was an awful month really for bird watching. But you just don't know what may turn up, and species like red-eyed vireo is very much long overdue in the county. And that brings me nicely on to overdue first for the county. So I'm going to finish off the slideshow in just a few slides. So it just goes to show the species that are yet to have turned up in the county, and rather surprisingly so. So the first one is Arctic Warbler. Now this is this bird turns up annually on Shetland, Orkney, east coast of Scotland, and down the entirety of the east coast of England, normally stopping around Norfolk. Kent doesn't get too many records, but it's still very surprising that the county has not yet had an Arctic Warbler. And Eastern Nodovaceous Warbler, another very scarce warbler, much rarer than the Arctic Warbler in UK terms. But being on the south coast, and with Hampshire getting an Eastern Nodovaceous only a few years ago, I'm sure this one will be on the county list in a few years. Brown shrike, this has had a turn of events in recent years in the UK. Large number, well, not large numbers, but small numbers now arrive onto the UK shores. Again, stopping around Norfolk. So Kent and Sussex do tend to miss out on this species, but Hampshire have had a record. So again, I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we see brown shrikes in the county. And now a species that has practically turned up in every other county apart from Sussex is the Eastern Yellow Wagtail. So again, another species that is set to turn up very soon. And lastly, I believe the Greater Yellowlegs. Again, Hampshire has turned this bird up many a time, Kent as well. For some reason, Sussex has completely missed out on this one as well. But there we go, that's just the roll of the dice. And I believe that is everything. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed my talk. Very brief, I know, but there we go. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's Mark, your host here again briefly. I think all of us were struck by just how knowledgeable you are about Sussex birds, to be able to speak so eloquently about them. Really impressive. And the photos were amazing. I'm not sure I've ever seen such a sequence of high quality photos. So that was brilliant. Must have been hundreds of hours of photographic effort behind those. I'm just going to hand over to, in a second, to John Curzon, who's another big name in Sussex birding, who's going to deal with the as many questions as possible. I just want to say that some of you had sound issues. It may help in future to put headphones on, but if you want to watch the talk again, we will have a recording of it available on our YouTube channel very soon. But let me pass now straight over to John.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Can you hear me okay first?
Yeah, you can hear you fine.
Okay, thanks. Right, well, thanks, Matt. First of all, I had lots of comments saying what a great talk it was. That's great. Yeah, there were some comments about the sound early on, but Mark's dealt with that. So, but yeah, great talk. Everyone appreciated it. We had quite a few questions. I'll get through as many as we can in the sort of 5 or 10 minutes we've got, but the questions I can't answer. If your question wasn't answered, we will put them on the SOS, the Sussex Ornithological Society website, in due course, or as soon as we can, so you can look at them that way. Okay. In fact, that was one question. What is the SOS? It's the Sussex Ornithological Society. So if you're not a member, please consider joining. Okay, we had several questions on this topic, Matt, and that was complimenting on your excellent photos and what camera equipment do you use?
Oh, great. Nice, easy question. Thank you for that one. So I use a Canon 7D Mark II with a 100-400mm lens, also a Mark II lens. It's extremely good for subjects far away, but also if you have a very close subject as well, you're able to zoom out and obtain that photo. So that's, I think, the best setup to use.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. Another question that a few people raised was the topic of waders. You know, people enjoyed your photographs of waders, but a couple of people said that they can be tricky to identify. You know, they all look sort of quite similar. Have you got any tips for identifying them in the field?
Well, Christ, how long have you got? Well, yeah, tips in the field. I spent a lot of my younger years just trawling through bird books, and basically to the point where I kind of knew the species. But there are small factors here. So species like the wood sandpiper, I kind of consider that to be the only wader with a white supercilium. So that's the wood sandpiper cleared up. Curlew sandpiper is one of the not many species to have a white rump, for example. So curlew sandpiper is normally mixed with dunlin. So normally in flight, you can tell the differences there. But just very close inspection, make sure you've got a telescope with you if you are going out specifically for waders. But apart from spending 10 or 15 minutes going through each wader species, there's not much I can really add there. Just make sure you've got a good bird book with you that points out the key features, and hopefully that should sort you out.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Another one was an interesting one was would any drift migrants come from within the UK?
No, not necessarily. So our UK migrants, they tend to head in a southeasterly trajectory anyway, towards the southeast corner. Hence why we get such large numbers here in the southeast compared to a place like Portland Bill, that in the spring obviously outnumber us completely. But during the autumn, they actually get very few numbers of autumn migrants. That's mainly because our UK birds, they just tend to head southeast towards the southeast corner of England, where there's obviously a shorter distance between Kent or Sussex and France. So not necessarily drift migrants, but just standard migrants.
Okay, great. Another interesting one was why are aquatic warblers declining in Europe?
So it's mainly down to farming techniques and also the management of their wetlands. So unfortunately, countries like Poland, for example, this is where the main aquatic warbler population is, as well as Belarus. So the farming techniques are changing, but also the land is just becoming drier, and out there they don't have the capabilities to maintain these wetlands. So that's why the population is dwindling, sadly.
Yeah, thanks for that. They have got a very specialised habitat, and as Matt says, it's under serious threat from agricultural improvement. Okay, here's a good one for you, Matt. Why do hoopoes have funny heads? I assume it's talking about the crests that they can raise. And
yeah. So their crests. So during the spring, especially when they're singing, they actually fan that crest out, and well, if you're lucky to see it, it's a wonderful sight. So it's basically part of the displaying ritual.
Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more, probably. I think a very quick one that I can probably answer myself is, does the Selsey Peninsula include Pagham Harbour? And I'm assuming that you are including that.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
was an easy one. Okay. Oh yeah. What do willow warblers sound like? Somebody asked.
So I'll stick with the autumn as I'm doing the autumn. Well, my mouth's quite dry. It's basically a short whistle. If you can hear that, I'm not sure if you can hear that, but
yeah, we can.
So that's kind of what they sound like in the autumn. In the spring, they have a beautiful melodic song, but I'm not going to embarrass myself, and I'm going to mute you.
I think that was an excellent invitation, actually, Matt.
Yeah, I know.
What could we do? Oh, yes, someone asked about if you know what the best website would be to check for places to see particular species. There's probably loads, actually.
Yeah, there's many local websites. So like, obviously there's the local RSPB websites for Pagham Harbour. Rye Harbour has their own website as well. Of course, there's my blog that does the local area when I'm allowed to go down to Sussex nowadays. But there's no specific websites. It's mainly researching the local area and then trying to find out from there. But the SOS is full of resources. So if you click on the map section or species section, there may be a link there for you.
Okay, thanks. Perhaps I can just add that the SOS has a recent sightings page where if you visit that, you can get up-to-date information on what interesting birds have been seen in the county. We're probably sort of close to the time now. I'll just see if there's any other. Yeah, somebody asked if any of these birds are up in Lewis in Scotland. I assume that person, Kyla, comes from Scotland.
Yes, so thank you, Kyla. Yeah, so species like the cuckoos, grasshopper warblers and willow warblers, they're actually quite abundant in northwest Scotland. So it's certainly worth keeping an eye out there. Other species such as chiffchaffs and the waders, like common sandpipers, etc. They can easily be found up there. So yes, yeah, most of the species are up there.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Okay, I think we better stop it there. There were a few other questions we haven't got time for, but as I said, we've got a log of them, and we'll try and get them answered and posted on the our SOS website as soon as we can. So
Brilliant.
Thanks again, Matt. That was great. A lot of compliments about your talk and your photography. So good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, again, Matt. And I think the way you answered those questions just reinforced what I said earlier about how knowledgeable you are on Sussex birds and the wider globe that they some of them come from. So as we said, we hope that there will be a recording of this talk available if you want to catch up on it later. Do look on the SOS website and consider please making a donation, or if you could join, that would be fantastic. You'll get 2 bird reports, the one for 2019 and the one for 2020. And the last thing for me to say is our next talk is on the New Forest, and that's at the same time in a week's time by Marcus Ward, who's the director of Wild New Forest. So thank you very much indeed, Matt. We can't give you a clap because nobody will hear it, but there's a virtual clap out there. Thank you very much indeed again, and have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, Sim.